Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at this webinar, Building Your Life Science Business in Europe Starts in Flanders, organized by I2ACT, headed by Debrabandere, based in Toronto, and Flanders Investment Trade. I am Yves Lapere, head of the Economic Mission of Flanders, Belgium, and Canada, responsible for Flanders Investment Trade. To start, some practical issues. Your microphones are muted during the presentation and the panel discussion, and you can put your questions during the webinar in the chat. At the end of the panel discussion, the questions will be answered. The life science industry is one of the key sectors in the ecosystem of Flanders, and to us, and is still important in the fight against the COVID pandemic. Just to give one example, Prime Minister Trudeau, during his last visit to Belgium mid-June, visited Pfizer in Puurs, Belgium, which delivered more than 10 million anti-COVID vaccinations to Canada. And also, nowadays, Belgium remains the main exporter and supplier of anti-COVID vaccinations in Canada. During this webinar, my colleague Jan Wauters, Science and Technology Counselor for Life Sciences and Nanotechnologies, will paint the picture of the life science industry in Flanders. In consequence, he will moderate the panel discussions with two industry leaders who are living or lived in America and have a strong connection with Flanders, Belgium. They will give you practical first-hand information about how they see the actual and in the future the life science industry in Flanders, and what are the links with America and more specifically with Canada. Enjoy the webinar, and it's my pleasure to hand over the virtual mic to my colleague Jan Wauters.
Okay, thank you very much, Yves. I hope you can all hear me well. Welcome all to this very interesting webinar on the life sciences ecosystems, and especially on the discussion that we will have with two distinguished executives from the health tech industry, and learn more about what makes an ecosystem successful, what are do's and don'ts, in order to be a winner in this kind of industry. As Yves was saying, let me start with a short introduction about the industry of Flanders, or the ecosystem of Flanders. I have a couple of pictures and a couple of impressions that I would like to show to you to position the ecosystem that we have in Belgium, and actually the northern Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, in the world. So when we talk about an ecosystem, we start with a vision and a long-term strategy, which is also very important for governments to realize, because a government tends to be dependent on the cycles of elections. So we may have to make sure that in some sense the vision is translated in a strategy that is longer than the 4 years or 6 years of a government. And so we distinguish a number of key ingredients that are important in this. And one, of course, is very specific for our region, in the sense that Belgium and Flanders has a central location. But you need more than that. You need, of course, to be excellent in technology breakthroughs and in sciences. So excellence in R&D is important. You need to have the fact that, of course, the science can be translated. So you need an entrepreneurial climate to that. And in order to be able to do that, you need to have money, to say it simply, starting from seed capital or pre-seed capital, even mezzanine financing before you go IPO. It's very important to have an industry that has proven itself, because in many ways, the industry that's proven itself or has continued to prove themselves, they are a pool of talent. They are the people. They are there for the next generation. They are serial entrepreneurs. They are the critical mass in a number of sense. They are also influencers in the region or in the country. And of course, and then I speak for me and Yves, of course, the support needs to be good. We as a government need to realize that we have to enable this kind of climate. We can talk about money, but we can talk also about labor laws and stuff like that. Okay, so a couple of pictures. So this is the northern part of Belgium, as you can see it. So this is Flanders, where the capital is Brussels, and I've highlighted the number of cities that are active in the life sciences, and of course it's not exhaustive. But as you can see, it always groups around universities, and that's where it in many cases happens to get the innovation going. This is an example of Leuven, and I think we can share the slides afterwards because I'm not going to read anything of this. The idea is basically that you do much more than having a university, than having maybe an R&D center or maybe a clinical center. You need a number of factors that are there also, be it very easily. You need terrains, you need sites to be able to put the companies there and be able to grow them. You need maybe modular bioincubators and stuff like that. We will all touch about these things in our discussion with our two executives later on. This is an aerial picture of Gasthuisberg. Gasthuis is actually a Dutch word for ziekenhuis. It's for hospital. It's an old word. And as you can see, the reason I want to show you this is if you would read all of this, you would see that this is a campus that actually has almost everything that's related to health tech, including the students in biomedical sciences, for instance, that get to learn on the job, that get to learn from the people that are in the entrepreneurial business, that are in the university business, that are the surgeons and so on. They're all forming one ecosystem. I would like to mention in this health tech also the presence of strategic research centers in the United States. You might call them with some daring comparison national laboratories. So IMEC is one of those 4 strategic research centers, partly funded by the government, but in a large part actually helping themselves, so to speak, on finances. About 80% of the over 600 million today comes from industry research. So industry consortium in semiconductors and nanotechnologies, and they are increasingly working on life sciences, and we will hear some examples of that, for instance, by Katleen later on. Okay, where life sciences meet nano, that's what IMEC does. And here you will see a number of technologies and possibilities that you can imagine, and they are applied, or they can be applied to a number of domains, as you can see there. Could be gene sequencing, could be PCR, microfluidics applications, you name it. There's the fact that the dimensions of the semiconductors and the nanotechnologies are of the same scale as the basic building blocks of living organisms makes the applications, of course, very, very interesting to do so. And it creates consortia, and here are a number of logos that you can see. Some of them you will recognize, and some of them that you think like, oh, they're not really in the health tech space from a first sight, but they are also interested in joining us. We can always talk about that later on. Another example, I will not go really into much detail in order to keep the time short, is Ghent. It's an equal powerhouse. It's the same thing. You have a huge university with a number of engineers and life sciences specialists that graduate each year. There is the VIB, which is another strategic research center, and I'll come back to that in a second. But there's also incubation parks. There's a big university hospital, and so on. So here the VIB, it's a research center where you actually group 5 sites at different universities in one virtual center with one strategy, one commercialization strategy, and one budget. And then you can combine all these things. You can combine nanotechnologies with neurology, for instance, and then you get the neuroelectronics research facility, NERV, which is together with Universities of Leuven clinical assets, is really something that is going to make a difference in the future. This convergence of different technologies. Here are some more aerial pictures of infrastructure. It's really quite impressive that you will find this all in a 1-hour drive from each other. Maybe a word on the COVID. It's quite interesting to mention that we have a number of activities there in fighting the pandemics, not just the vaccine development or the production, but also in finding antivirals, but also diagnostic testing. And we will also hear from that later on in this session. And also the logistics. Brussels Airport is in fact the #1 European hub in logistics for vaccines. And for production, we have a Pfizer's hub. They are doing about 100 million vaccines a month right now, and they project to have over 4 billion vaccines produced in 2022. And is I would say, probably the largest European vaccine production hub there is. Brussels Airport exports to more than 40 countries. Important here to mention is They are really the specialists in cold chain logistics for these kind of things, not just vaccines, but also other stuff that require very cold transporting of specialized life sciences goods. Finding a cure is important. This is an example I'm just showing you just to make sure that we are also fighting the disease when you have it, so that you can take hopefully they can take a pill or an injection to prevent from being ill. This is based on camelids. So there are nanobodies that they take from the antibody system, from the immune system of a camelid, from a llama. The llama is called, the first llama was called Wauters, if I remember well, and is now currently retired. But they spun up very interesting companies. The last one is Exegir Bio. Okay, a few words on the industry. This is the Pfizer site again as a picture, but I have more pictures on that. First of all, I want to mention that clinical development is important. So the clinical trials, we aim to be the #1 clinical trial center in Europe. Per capita, we're now #2 in terms of clinical trials per 1,000 inhabitants, after Denmark, I think, and Switzerland. Switzerland's not technically European Union, but we are there at the forefront, and we're also very fast in phase 1, for instance. That maybe is important for some of you who are joining us. So there's a number of factors that form an ecosystem, and of course we're very fortunate that the region has a long-standing tradition with big pharma, and this helps in the biology and in the medtech and the health tech field today. This is some picture of the infrastructure that you have for starting companies, smaller companies, fast-growing companies, where they have a lot of modular possibilities. And I think I have another picture on that. And here is an overview of the big pharma companies that are present in the region. As you can see, most of them are there. And not just with a sales office, but Janssen, for instance, has almost 5,000 people. Sanofi a couple of thousand, and Pfizer 3,000, and you name it, it's there. So this is a picture of the Pfizer site. This is the Janssen site that you can see. This is GSK, just 10 miles south of Flanders, Rixensart. This is actually started as a spin-off of the University of Leuven. Novartis is there, Elcon, and I mean I can go on, but I won't do that. A couple of interesting companies to follow are Argenex and Galapagos. I think Argenex is one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, biotech company right now in Europe, valued over 10 billion. And I should correct Galapagos, they are a little bit less now, but they're still a very promising company. It's important to mention JLabs. JLabs, as you all know, originated in the United States. I think the first one was in San Diego. The first one outside of the United States was in Canada, in Toronto. And the first one outside of North America is in Belgium, as it appears. And on the top left or top right, you see again the Janssen site. We have a new training center that could be important for companies who want to set up shop in the area. It's called Vitalent. They deliver dedicated training for pharma and biotech industry. So it's really the idea to go a step further than that, to go with certification, qualification of people that are active in this kind of work. Could also be used for maybe companies that have CDMO in activities, so they can really get the workforce that is trained in the right way. Yeah. On the medtech side, it's just a very small group of companies that I'm showing, because there are many more than that, but it's something that is really up and coming, especially on the conversion between bio and nanotechnology. And as you can see there, we see a couple of examples where you go from a big lab to a very small unit. And then I think I'm going to finish now with the fact that I think Yves already mentioned a couple of those things. I would like to say that the government is very supportive. We have very good incentives on grants, grants that go up to 60% of co-financing for companies that do R&D. The 60% applies to the R, 40% applies to the D. And then there's very good incentives that we have on people working in the R&D field, and also people that have and companies that have patents and other IP that is of interest, and that get very low effective corporate tax rates. And I'm going to finish with this slide, honestly, because that gives again this ecosystem, which might be the start of the discussion, where you can see a number of highlights on what are important. And I'm probably missing a couple of aspects of what makes an ecosystem, and that's why we have our two experts coming right after me. I would leave it with that and start immediately, if that's okay with you, Yves, with the panel discussion. I'm going to keep this slide for a second and then I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, what I would like to do in this next part is very quickly introduce the two speakers of the panel, and a bit quickly I would like to say just their name and affiliation, and then leave the word to them to give a short introduction on who they are, because they know better who they are than I do. So we have two speakers. Katleen Verleysen is CEO of miDiagnostics, and miDiagnostics is a very fast-growing, promising company on can it be on the diagnostics, and amongst others with applications in, for instance, PCR, very rapid PCR testing. She's a very seasoned executive and started many companies in the field. Let's start with you, Katleen, maybe to give you the floor for 30 seconds or so.
Okay, thank you very much, and very happy to be here. So just a little bit more background. I'm indeed now CEO of miDiagnostics. Before that, I was 4 years at IMEC. You got a brief introduction into IMEC as well. I think it's one of the #1 R&D facilities for engineering and nanotech and silicon technologies. So they basically have 2 billion clean room infrastructure that's actually used to play with chips and to really kind of see how these could be more often now be employed in life sciences. And so miDiagnostics is one of the spin-outs of IMEC. It started in 2015, really with the goal of taking, accurate diagnostics out of the centralized setting. Of course, now with the pandemic, this became even more relevant. We saw that we acted in a very reactive way instead of being proactive. Simply because we didn't have the tools to do population-wide screening on a recurrent basis, and also using accurate testing for that matter. So with miDiagnostics, we're going to launch a 9-minute PCR test that has exactly the same sensitivity, specificity as the classical PCR test. But of course, since it's done in 9 minutes, this gives many advantages, of course, for certain settings, mainly travel. And events where people actually will say, okay, instead of 2 or 3 days before I will fly, I need to do a test. You will be able to do a test just prior to boarding. So this is a very interesting journey, I must say, because the time pressure is definitely there. We're still going to live and coincide with COVID for many years to come. But so very exciting times for miDiagnostics. Before that, and I think that's a little bit of myself and the other speaker as well, is that we've spent quite a lot of years in the States. I started my career, I did a postdoc at the Medical Center of Duke University in North Carolina. And then we worked on technology that we spun out into a startup company that 5 years later was successfully sold to Pfizer. And then I had the decision, either I was going to go and work for Pfizer, or I decided to actually return back to Belgium and take all that experience back home. And ever since, I've started companies and did exit companies. So that's a little bit about me. I've always been active in medical devices, diagnostics, although I did start my career on the pharmaceutical side of things. The company that we've created in the US called Argenex was actually more on the pharmaceutical side of things. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Katleen. Lode Debrabandere is an experienced executive in this life sciences ecosystem. He has worked in managerial positions in, if I remember well, UCB and Bristol Myers Squibb before he became the CEO of Osiris Therapeutics. And the rest I will leave it up to you, Lode, to introduce yourself. Already said too much, maybe.
No, you started really well. Thank you, Jan. Happy to be here as well. I would say, just to give you some perspective in terms of, my US versus Flanders balance there. I came to the States in '95 with UCB Pharma, as Jan said. I'm basically starting the operations of UCB Pharma in Atlanta, Georgia. And I mean, that was a kind of life-changing experience for me. We planned to be here for 3 to 5 years, but unlike Katleen, after 5 years, we decided not to come back anymore and stay in the States. So we did stay in the States. I'm here 25, 26 years now. But you know, in the last couple of years of my career, I then became more of an entrepreneur, looking at technologies out of universities, both on this side of the ocean as well as in Belgium, and based on these technology, based on that IP, starting new companies. And my experience has been extraordinarily pleasant, starting new companies in Flanders, and we can talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm pretty sure we will find out more about the two of you guys during this discussion. So I would like to start with a first topic, which is an obvious one when we talk about ecosystems all over the world. It is a fact that many regions seem to be in a race to be the best, and you also see it on websites of regions, of countries, of states to claim to have the best life science ecosystem or want to have the best ecosystems. You both lived and worked in the Americas and in Europe. What is your opinion and where is it leading to? Is it the fact that it's going to be ultimately Silicon Valley or Boston and that's it? Or maybe is the future in those gems of ecosystems that are coming up, like for instance, the Quebec region or the Flanders region? What is your perspective on that?
So I think there are goods and positives and pros and cons on both sides. I think if we look at money that's around in Europe, it is still more limited compared to the US. It's pretty clear that the financial means that are around in the US is still of another level than what we have in Europe. But that sometimes can come with a disadvantage as well. What I typically see is that, you know, you have these brute force approaches that there's so much money available that almost people do not have to think anymore. And that can be a pitfall and a danger as well. I often say to my teams, whatever company I do in Belgium, I often say, okay, you know, maybe we might not have, you know, the extraordinary means that we would love to have, but that means that we'll think twice before we actually do or conduct certain experiments. Having said that, it's not that there's no money around either. There's, if we look now at miDiagnostics, there's 150 million euros that has been put in the company, which is not a small startup company anymore. So there's definitely, if need be, there's definitely enough financial bandwidth. Having said that, I think we have to think a little bit more carefully in terms of, you know, our development plans and how we go about things. And yeah.
I think, yeah, I agree with all of that. To me, you know, when you talk about healthcare specifically, you really talk about, you know, R&D, technology, IP, highly educated people, and if you look at Flanders, what is impressive to me is, you know, you showed the map, Jan, about Flanders and how you connect those universities, and you know, just want to be sure that the audience understand this is about 50 kilometers on 35 kilometers. Okay, exactly. There is no region in the United States that has this density of R&D capabilities and output. Not Boston, not Silicon Valley. That is a very small geographic region with an extraordinary dense population in this space. I think that's just a big advantage. Now, having said that, you know, I think what sets Silicon Valley, Boston, you know, apart is, you know, I would say two things. You know, one was just mentioned by Katleen, is the financial muscle is there, and it's very strong. And two, obviously, you know, investors think about the market, and so they invest in a company, and then that company launches products. What's the market behind that? And of course, the United States is the market with 50, you know, states all speaking the same language. You know, that's just a strength of the United States, which Europe in general is a little bit less obvious because there's still, you know, individual governments and all of that. So that would be the advantage, but you can easily overcome that by completely leveraging this density of expertise and output. And you leverage that by doing a lot of R&D in Europe and be very productive at a lower cost. That's also very important. It is at a lower cost than if you would do the same R&D in Europe or in the States, and it's equally as good as, if not better. And then early on, I recommend everybody to set up shop in the United States, and then just basically create that runway for your products and your technology and your R&D just to really just get it into the United States and take off in this massive market. So, you know, it makes a lot of sense to build the R&D, to build the IP, to build the knowledge base in Flanders for all the reasons you just mentioned, and they are not to be underestimated. Reasons like, you know, government support. I personally enjoyed the interaction with the government. We did get a grant for a brand new company we started, and that triggers a domino effect. You get a quality stamp from the agency that provides R&D grants, and then external investors look at that and say, all right, check, you did that, awesome. There's non-dilutive capital available, and there is quite a bit, and it's accessible. So now the dilutive capital comes easier. And so that's a very important indirect consequence of government support, is that it represents a quality stamp, and it is kind of a first step in a domino of other investors being more willing to step in. And I think that's very important as well, and something that can be leveraged, and which makes this whole R&D dense kind of ecosystem very attractive. But don't forget, go to the States as quickly as you can, because that's where there's a big market, and don't be shy from that.
Yeah, I think I want to well comment on that as well, Lode. It's in terms of human capital. So we often talk about the money, but sometimes one of the biggest challenges that we face is actually getting access to the right talent. Also sitting in the board of directors of a company in Seattle, Immunexpress, which is a sepsis-based a company with sepsis diagnostics already on the market. And the company was in Seattle, and we wanted to change CEOs, and we had lots of issues actually attracting people. Because although Seattle, there's quite a lot of things happening, and it seems to be a booming area. Having said that, knowing that we were not based out of Silicon Valley or not San Diego, we actually had lots of issues attracting the right people. So it's not just, and that's why Lode was referring to, Belgium and Flanders is so small, you know, you have everybody concentrated. And now I think in the past 5 to 10 years, we have a huge track record of successful companies, and not the small ones. We have Ablings, we have Argenex, we have so many of them. And every single time that these companies are starting, we recruit worldwide. We're not going to say, oh, we stay in Flanders, we recruit worldwide. And what happens is that once people are settling in Belgium and have done one startup company, if that company has seen an exit, people stick around, and we can now tap out of, you know, a huge talent pool, which makes it a little bit more straightforward, and will also determine a little bit the success, our forthcoming success. Having said that, I also want to confirm what Lode is saying. The landscape definitely has changed. Beforehand, I'm talking about 20 years ago, when we were doing startup companies, we had like the submarine approach. We were all kind of, you know, sitting in our little ivory tower, not mentioning a word, not coming out with anything, and we were not doing any anchoring whatsoever, and we tried to do everything ourselves. I think that's a big mistake, and that's a mistake that we've learned the hard way. And what definitely has changed is that people will immediately from the get-go, and I will always do it with whatever company, I will anchor the company. I will look for partnerships, and I will put, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be in Flanders. One example now, miDiagnostics, actually our chip production is happening 1 hour east of Montreal. So our chip production is actually sitting in Canada. Why? Is because Canada is the #1 MEMS chip manufacturing country. Nothing can beat it. Of course, you can go to Silterra, but there's Silterra in Malaysia, who will do it cheaper, but they don't have MEMS expertise. It's a special field, more well-versed into microfluidics, more life sciences-oriented type of applications. And so what we do, we'll just scan and say, okay, where can we find the best partner? We're very happy with this relationship. This is a relationship that's working really well, but I think it's very important for startups as well. Don't work in isolation. You need to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Certainly in my field, diagnostics is still best reimbursed in the US. So if we're not going to the US market, we're not going to be a success.
Does that mean that that in the future companies will always be fragmented in regions where you will find the right expertise? Say, for instance, like your MEMS production will be in Canada. Maybe there is going to be a commercial aspect in the States and R&D in Flanders. Is that the future?
To me, well, whether it's the future, I don't know, but it's the reality right now. We do not have all that expertise in Belgium. We do not have chip manufacturing set up in Belgium, so we have to go abroad. We actually use silicon as a disposable. It's not a chip that you put in a computer and then it will last you for a couple of years, hopefully, but we basically use it as a consumable. You do one PCR test and the test is thrown in the bin. So that means that you actually need to go to huge millions and millions of that chip production, which we don't have in Belgium. We do have IMEC, which is a research hub, but it's not a production. They're not ISO certified. You need to go to these, big foundries that have the right certification to really get you to production and so forth. So we're scanning the market. That's another question, of course. Do we feel or do we think that Flanders need to have all that expertise to be successful? I don't think so either. I think it's often important as well that if you want to be active and selling products in the US, you need to have a footprint there as well. If you have some collaborations going there, you will definitely benefit from it. And we had to learn that in Belgium the hard way as well. We had companies trying to launch a product that were not having a footprint in the US, and it seemed to be difficult. The product seemed to be not right positioned and so forth. So no,
I would like to jump on that because Lode, you already mentioned that too. You have to go over the ocean as fast as you can. Is it something that is still on the European side, that they are too shy to do that they are too much looking at neighboring countries before they jump into the Canadian or US market? And is there a second question is it maybe for some companies that are a little bit afraid of the US culture, so to speak, for now amongst Flanders and Canadian friends anyway, that maybe they should go to Canada as a fact that it is the best of both worlds, maybe for some perceived as partly a European mentality and a US mentality?
Canada is kind of, indeed, still North America is a little bit has a bit of a cultural DNA of both sides, right? But it depends, the more west you go in Canada, the more you get into the American kind of culture. But I would say that further to what Katleen also said, you go where the talent is, you go where you need to be in order to get what you need. And yes, I would say in Europe, my experience is still that people think, oh, we can manage it from our office, in Brussels or Ghent or Leuven, and we're just going to wait to do our investment in the United States. And you don't have to invest big from the beginning. You have to invest fast and smart. And it doesn't have to be big, but you do need to feel the pulse of the market. And that means a lot of years before you actually launch your product. You got to feel the pulse. You got to know what's important. You got to know you got to build a network. But actually, if something Corona taught as well, it is that you can manage a lot, and build relationships, without being physically present all the time. So you don't have to be afraid to have, people in the United States, and then thinking that you have to be yourself in the United States all the time. No, you can connect with your colleagues through Teams and Zoom very easily. And so, yes, I would recommend people to do it faster. It's not a huge investment, but it's going to be one that pays off. But I also don't think, I mean, culturally, I think the world becomes, one place, in my opinion. So I don't think that there's a huge cultural shyness around it. And it's just the leadership that, ideally has the experience. And if the leadership, has the experience, a US experience or Canadian experience or European experience, they will much easier push. And my experience is young Flemish talent that, by the way, is extraordinarily multilingual, which is a competitive advantage. That young talent, immediately jumps on the opportunity to interact with American colleagues or Canadian colleagues, and because they speak the languages and because the leadership tells them that that's what we need to do. Don't be afraid of that. Just go. And it's a good problem to have, to be honest with you. Also, that sometimes when, let's say, a Belgian company would set up something in the States, that the US company might become bigger than the mother company, and that's fine. You just need to manage that. You just need to leverage that. But I want to again say that your kind of area where you build your quote unquote headquarters, it is important to have that density. We just heard an example of Seattle. I mean, the United States has 100 of those examples, 100 Seattles, and Seattle is actually already a big city, has many empty areas. And so, if you go into an empty area to build something, it's harder. I mean, Canada has a lot of empty areas too. They have concentrations, but they have a lot of empty areas. And I think the strength of Belgium being in the center of Europe, having a multilingual and very pro-healthcare kind of ecosystem, the strength there is that you can start from there and build a strong foundation, R&D especially, and then early on reach out. And I don't see shyness. I just see that experienced leadership needs to just drive that, and then it's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think we cannot ignore, of course, that, and that's not a Flanders thing, but that's more a European thing, is that certainly in my space, diagnostics and medical devices, is that reimbursement is of a completely different level. And also, well, I wouldn't say straightforward, because you always have all the different payers and payment plans in the US. But what you have in Europe is that your certification CE marking is under European legislation. Reimbursement is country per country. And that is complicated, knowing that it comes with all the different languages, and the negotiations are quite tough, and the price pressure for your reimbursement is huge as well. So I don't have another choice than actually launching, in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's because I'm going to have much bigger margins. And certainly if you're a young company and your products, I mean, the costs of goods are still going to be on the high end. You don't have these economies of scale yet. So initially, if you don't want to lose money on launching your product, you almost don't have a choice than actually go after countries where reimbursement can be easily put in place and is much higher than what you typically see in Europe. So that is, of course, very important as well, I believe. Yeah.
Canadian dynamics of reimbursement is probably very similar than European dynamics of reimbursement. So I don't see a big difference there, but yes, in the United States, it sounds it's highly fragmented, so it makes it also complicated.
Yeah. What I thought was striking, and where I believe we have lots of power, and also what we've seen in the pandemic is we actually have UZ Leuven and other hospitals, but particularly UZ Leuven in Belgium is in the top 3 of best clinical sites for clinical trial work in Europe. And we felt that during the pandemic, because I always look what is the States doing in reaction to that, and they immediately put that RADx system together, that you have one point of entry to do all your clinical trials for COVID. And I thought, oh, it would be nice in Europe if we could do the same thing. Having said that, we didn't need such a system. We immediately had the University Hospital of Leuven jumping on, what we needed to do. We actually had ethical committee approval within 5 days. This is something that it's unprecedented. We immediately got access to the entire student population in Flanders. And of course, students, if you give them some gift certificates and whatever, you can swap them 10 times a day for consecutive days. Nobody's complaining. So that's what I love about Flanders, and where I see a little bit more pragmatic, down to earth kind of approach than compared to the States. And also people, their contribution to, their willingness to participate into studies is quite high. We don't have these lawsuit liability kind of things hanging over our head. Of course, we have all the right insurances. You never know, but I see a very, very down-to-earth, pragmatic population in Flanders that is always willing to put their shoulders underneath research and trials. And if it wasn't for that, there was no way we could have developed that 9-minute PCR test.
If you don't mind, Jan, I would like to elaborate a little bit on that. We didn't talk a lot about the quality of our universities, or not yet, and maybe that's on your question or on your list of topics, but I do want to mention and put it in perspective a little bit. I studied at the University of Leuven, so I know Leuven pretty well, and in one of the companies I started in Belgium, we licensed technology from Leuven, so I know the system. And it's funny because my daughters who were raised in the United States, they both went to Vanderbilt University, and I also did some post studies at Johns Hopkins and Georgetown and all of that. So all kind of names that are well recognized in the States. But then you look at the listing of universities in the world, and I was very proud to say that University of Leuven, and even Ghent for that matter, is actually ahead of some of these universities. And so we should really not be shy about where we stand. We are in Flanders with those universities extraordinarily strong on the global map of quality of universities. And when you think about you asked about Silicon Valley, Boston, where to put your next kind of venture. Boston is very similar to Flanders. It has this extraordinary high quality set of universities, and by name they're still a little bit in a different league, I would say, but they have an extraordinary concentration, and then some professors / entrepreneurs that are constantly spinning out companies, and then you have the financial world picking them up. I think we are seeing that right now in Flanders too. We have the Flemish Institute of Biotechnology, University of Leuven, Ghent, Antwerp. Those guys are now not the professors anymore like 30 years ago. They are entrepreneurs. These professors are top-notch in their field, and they are very much eager to, find a receiving party of their technology that can actually commercialize it. And I think that is that's very similar to Boston, and an extraordinary advantage of this high density of universities that are of high quality.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add, what we saw with the pandemic as well. I think there's definitely much more entrepreneurship now in Belgium, certainly with the young generations. They see everything moving, and they're all eager to start companies. The only pitfall we have to avoid is that, sometimes it was easy to start something. You just mentioned, I'm working on COVID and I'm going to have a breakthrough, and you raised money. And we saw these things coming up and disappear as quickly as they came up. And I think we need to be careful that we're not throwing money at whatever, whoever is screaming, I have something, I would dread to see that the quality of what we want to do is actually going down. But there's definitely much more entrepreneurship in Flanders than a couple of years ago. Yeah.
In that sense, when you mentioned the pandemic, it's not over yet. It's certainly not in the whole world. And as you see the latest numbers, it's still there, and it's going to stay for us for a little while longer. You can see also that in the beginning of at least in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of protectionism from countries and regions to make sure that they had their population served, and it's still in some ways or in some countries it still is. But on a broader picture, on a longer picture, with everything that ecosystems have in let's say in house or in their instruments, is Europe better placed to be on the forefront of next pandemics or post-pandemic era than the Americas, or will it be that we can only do this by creating a giant alliance overseas, transatlantic, and further, of course, with the whole world? How do you feel, first of all, where our position is? As are we in Europe doing our job there, or are we lagging?
Yeah, I think there's innovation on both sides, and I think the world is so big that every kid gets to play. Every newcomer and every kid on the block actually gets to play. If I'm looking at diagnostics, with our 9-minute PCR, are we the only ones? No. There are other fast PCR tests out there. I think there are competing technologies in Europe. Roche has their Lode system, which is a 20-minute PCR. In the US, there are 2 companies as well focused on rapid PCR. We're definitely not alone. There is competition. Having said that, we're not competing for a piece of the cake because the demand is so high that we actually say, even now with the 4 or 5 of us, we still do not have enough scale to really kind of cater for the entire population. So it's much more embracing one another and saying, okay, you know, we need to kind of fortify and basically make sure that everybody and every technology that has promise should come to fruition and provide as much scale as possible. It's the same with the vaccines. Pfizer alone does not have enough to actually vaccinate the entire world. So you clearly see that vaccines as well, as you know, Pfizer-BioNTech is actually coming out of Germany, and the production is coming out of Puurs in Belgium. So I think every country to its best possibilities is actually trying to contribute, and so I don't see it, you know, is Europe going to be at the forefront or is it going to be the US? I think we're all get to play. Yeah, and I think we can learn from one another as well. We're definitely looking at, you know, what are other countries doing, what are they good at. For instance, we can learn a lot what pandemics is concerned about the discipline that Asian countries have. They're much more robot-like in the sense that you tell them you wear masks, they wear masks. If you do that in France, where I live, you have to tell them 10 times, and even then, or the same with vaccinations. It's a different culture, and also the way they responded to the pandemic was much more extreme than what we're typically used to in Europe. So that's something, I mean, we can learn from that as well. It's not necessarily innovation that's coming out of these countries, but it's more a cultural thing in terms of discipline. And yeah, they were, of course, very strong in contact tracing as well. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the, when we come back to this, to the transatlantic interaction between North America and Europe and Flanders in particular, one of the things that got really in the background in the past 1.5 years because of the pandemics is the whole Brexit thing, the fact that the UK left the European Union. Now, for us, for Flanders, and looking at North America, traditionally, it's also the fact that many companies from North America choose, because of cultural similarities, choose the United Kingdom as a first footprint in Europe. Of course, the Brexit is changing these kind of things. What is your opinion that companies from both sides, both directions, I mean, is there going to be opportunities, or will there be shifts in this kind of sense? Will there be the necessity to have a company both in the United Kingdom, on the island, so to speak, and on continental Europe, and vice versa? Is it something that is going to affect businesses?
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing I want to mention, if we're talking about cultures, we see it as well because we have a very big collaboration with our Canadian chip manufacturer, which is actually the biggest cost in our company. Culturally, we as Flemish are much closer to Canadians than Americans. I think for Lode and myself, it's different because we spent a vast majority of our career in the US, that you pick up that culture and you learn to deal with it and so forth. Having said that, every time I fly to Canada, it doesn't feel, you know, culturally, I think we're quite close. Then when it comes, and it feels coming home in a sense. You talk to people, you do business in a similar way. It's all, you know, I think in a sense it's easier. It's done on trust, you know, even if contracts are not signed, production is already ongoing and so forth. And so which I value a lot. So what the US is concerned and the Brexit and so forth, what we already see is that people that want to have a footprint in Europe, and definitely from the Anglo-Saxon world, they would typically do that in UK. But now with the Brexit, what we see is that they're actually looking for mainland Europe to have their headquarters. And then Belgium will play a very important role, and simply because we speak many languages. Something that cannot be said from France, for instance. So I think there Belgium definitely plays a big role, particularly Flanders. From childhood on, we don't do any dubbing or whatever. We typically speak multiple languages. That plays a role, and we see it's Flanders as well as Switzerland. These are the hubs that external countries are now exploring to actually put their European hub. So yeah, we're going to benefit from that Brexit, I firmly believe. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I would say it's more of an active strategy than a passive strategy. What I mean with that is, you know, I don't know if we just passively look and see what happens. I'm not sure there's going to be a huge shift, but we have an opportunity to be proactive and active. And what I mean with that is, you know, Belgium and Flanders in particular, you know, it's the center of Europe, you know, headquarters of the NATO are there. You know, many companies have their European headquarters are there. So, you know, we need to just be more outspoken about that and sell the region even more in an active, proactive manner. So there might be an opportunity window, but if we're not proactive, it might pass us. And so that's my opinion. We need to really be proactive about it. And Belgium does not have only the advantages that we have been talking about for a while, but also like being at the center. You know, European Parliament is in Brussels, is in Belgium, NATO is in Belgium. You know, we have a train system that brings you in a couple hours everywhere, every major capital of Europe. You know, you can go to Madrid or Berlin or London or Paris in a couple hours with a train. And that's an advantage. Starting from the center, it's kind of easy it's a hub to get to these major places. So I think Belgium has still room for further being more proactive and sell. You know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That touches also on the other thing I wanted to ask was that's also something the United States, of course, has a lot of experience in. For instance, to compare them with probably also with Canada and Flanders, is the success stories and the fact that we bring these kind of things out. You see an evolution in that, in the sense that there are more companies that are handled as a success story, and that probably also people, because it's also related to the big question that we had in the beginning. What are two main factors in an ecosystem? Is it money or is it talent? I hear that more and more. It's more about people. Maybe if you have to make a ranking, I would like to maybe ask you that at the end of the discussion, what you put, money first or talent first. If you talk about examples, is it mostly the people and the success stories behind those examples? Because look at yourself, you've been successful entrepreneurs, serially based. Yeah, I mean, that takes up a role that is an example for other people. Maybe we don't promote that enough in the world.
Well, I think it will take some time, but it's definitely changing. Having done many startups and having done many rounds of financing, I'm quite well networked within Silicon Valley. So the Menlo Park Street, where you have all the top-notch life sciences investors. they typically invest still in American companies. Having said that, if you come with an interesting file and it's pitched correctly, and they're comfortable about, you know, who's in charge, then there's definitely money that is flowing in our direction. So the big ones are definitely considering investing into Europe as well. So I do see that changing. Of course, what you see in the US, investors typically invest in people. They don't necessarily invest into certain technologies. And you have these rock stars that are serial entrepreneurs, and they only have to come with, you know, if we look at Grail, for instance, Grail was 1.4 billion Series A round of funding. And I know Rick Klausner really well, who actually founded Grail, and he basically said, "Oh, Katleen, you know, I just put the one A4 together. That was my business plan." Yeah, of course, but if you see the track record of that man, of course, he doesn't need to write a book to really kind of convince investors. The investors know, if I put my money with that management team, whatever hiccup they will have, whatever roadblock they will have, they will solve it. And if today their idea was to do A and they ended up doing Z in the end, they don't care, but whatever is going to happen, it's going to be a success. Yeah. And you do have, you know, these teams that are migrating and doing one after the other successful companies. And there are two things. There are teams with ton loads of experience, but they can also count on the backing of a ton load of money as well. So if things go a little bit south, they immediately will be able to shift gears and throw much more money at it, and then be able to rescue whatever hurdle they had. Unfortunately, I believe in Flanders we're not known enough yet. We do not have these rock stars sitting there where American investors will look at and say, "Oh, they're touching something. We want to be part of that." But over time, this will change, certainly because we start to have a very good track record of successful companies and unicorns. So that, of course, does draw the attention, but it will require some time, I think. Yeah.
I would say numbers don't lie. And, you know, you have a slide in there that you passed on pretty fast because you know, in your introduction, you were moving fast. But numbers don't lie. When you look at, you know, 25 years ago when I left Belgium versus today, you know, it's two different worlds. And look at the market cap. You mentioned it quickly. The market cap of Belgian pharmaceutical industry, biotech industry is 23% of all of Europe. We are, you know, 3 or 4% of the population. So the number of new startups that are being done every year, and then the number of startups that reach a certain critical mass is just a significant increase over time. And I think that is the best testament to the region. It's the numbers, and then of course, you know, you need to build from those success stories, and that could be, you know, some serial entrepreneurs, that could be, you know, some people that have, you know, a major breakthrough. You build from that, and that helps you to sell more. The region, because, you know, Boston doesn't need to sell itself, quote unquote. You know, I would say Belgium, Flanders is not that far behind, but, you know, it could do a little bit more on its marketing and sales, just to make that even more clear, because it's very competitive to Boston.
Okay, yeah, thanks. The fact that we I'm pretty sure that in the pipeline these people, and that it will change in the next 5 to 10 years. So we talked about a lot of parameters there, including the successful entrepreneurs. In your opinion, it's a very open question. It's a dangerous question for me, being from the government. Well, what should the role of the government be in supporting a life science ecosystem other than the ones that were already mentioned, or is it enough? Or should we maybe not intervene too much in these kind of things? In your opinion, I mean, Katleen, you've been here already many years in Flanders, and Lode, you have new, fresh experiences in Flanders. Is there something that you think this could be better, or you probably should more focus on this or this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that are running really well, but there are certain things that I believe can be improved. One of the things I see is that there's quite significant amount of money around, and I must say that the government is actually supporting. There are many grants. They're also non-dilutive and what have you. So there's quite a lot of money that you can tap into. Although what I feel is that it's too fragmented. I think you have all kind of, you have Vlaio and you have PNV and you have then and so forth. So you see quite a lot of the government money all fragmented into different vehicles, and then you will go for 2 million here and 1.5 million there and so forth. I think we probably will have or can have even much more firepower if instead of putting that in all different buckets with all its different managements, consolidate things much more and be able to step in with bigger tickets. Yeah.
What you're saying is we need bigger funds also.
We need bigger funds. There are big funds, but for instance, one of the files I was working on at IMEC was a cell sorter type of technology. And what we typically see in Belgium is that, certainly in IMEC, you build these platforms. And a platform in itself, you're not going to spin that out into a company. A platform will need significant amount of money to bring it to maturity, and then that platform can spin out different diagnostic products or different products. What you typically see in the US, they keep that embedded within the universities. Universities have a wealth of financing or means to keep these platforms going, and then they'll create startup companies. And if one fails, no worries, the platform is still in existence. All the knowledge is still around that platform. So we said, okay, in Flanders, what are we going to do about this? Saying as well, we have interesting platforms, but the gap between, a mature platform and then creating the spin-outs and having their individual kind of funding, we need to bridge that gap. So we actually went to the cabinets and basically proposed and mentioned that problem. And they immediately made money available. They started off with 75 million euros. That was going to grow over time to 375 million euros. So it's not as such that there's no money. But then it failed a little bit in its execution, in the sense that they said, okay, but we want to make sure that this is not purely for research purposes. We want to see that this platform indeed comes much closer to market and creates companies that attracts then VC money all around, money that will flow to Flanders and what have you. But then they were saying, okay, we need to have X percentage of a VC stepping in right from the get-go. Yeah, and that is, of course, problematic. So that's why that money is sitting there. I haven't seen many projects being signed off from that fund. So I think the intentions are really good. Money is there. I think sometimes the execution of that could be a little bit, yeah.
But that's easy to solve.
Yes,
I do believe that the government has a role to play. You started your presentation, Jan, with a vision, a strategy. You probably could add a framework a little bit more, but the vision and the strategy is government driven, and you need that because you need that common denominator. And then the framework is more, how does the fit in specifically? How does the Ministry of Finance fit in? And I had great experiences with them as they explained me how to pay kind of less taxes because of the incentives. So I like that a lot. But so the government does have a role in vision and strategy, some level of framework, but then to Kathleen's point, if then there would be a more consolidated approach, given this vision, strategy and framework, I would leave then more of the execution to non-government. For example, a fund that is established with a certain mission in healthcare, let Katleen lead that. I could lead it, but it would be from here. But I'm just saying that there is you could attract people that more towards the fall of their career, and see if with all that experience they could actually facilitate execution, because we just understand better the kind of pulse of the market and the what's going on than the government can. So the government needs to step away after they set that vision and the strategy, which they did. they set the vision and strategy, but they haven't stepped away, in my opinion, enough on the execution side. You know, you mentioned PMV, you mentioned that. I mean, I think that needs to be a lot more ran by just people that have done this.
Yeah, I think I always make the difference, you know, sometimes we're too much Excel people. Yeah, and the other extreme is in the US, people do business based on gut feeling and a one-pager, while we, if you know, we want to tap into money or grant or whatever, we have to come up with an Excel and a file that you say, okay, we're going to be writing months here. Sometimes you need to, I mean, you lose that momentum. Sometimes I think we need to find a more efficient way and yeah, make these processes less cumbersome. And sometimes I agree totally with what Lode is mentioning. Don't be fearful of losing control. I remember one of the top VCs knocking on IMEC's door while I was IMEC. At IMEC, it was Arch Ventures, one of the big life sciences VCs, and knocked on our door and basically said, listen, we're going to put a 1 to 2 billion fund together focused on semiconductor technologies. Yeah, of course, in IMEC's sweet spot, they said, well, what do you have in the pipeline? Were we jumping on the occasion? No, I was screaming hard and loud and guys, and it was all, oh, but they're going to take over and they're going to control. And like, it's fine to lose control to somebody that, you know, creates one unicorn after the other, after the other, after the other. We can learn from them. Don't be afraid, you know, to give away control. If it's to the right people that manages things, why not, you know? Why are we so desperate to say, no, it needs to stay in Flemish hands or whatever? No, just surf on the success wave of the credits of other people, which is not bad either. So that's what we're still missing a little bit, I think, in Flanders. Yeah.
So what I hear a lot is about ideally we should be able to combine best of both worlds from both sides of the ocean. So we need to create maybe more two-legged structures, maybe like funds that have a foot on the North America and a fund that has, and the same fund that has a foot in Belgium or things like that. That we can actually benefit from each other and learn from each other because we both have a lot to offer. In view of the time, I would like to end with a question, which is also related to partly to what you guys both are doing or have been doing or are going to do, is the fact that it was also touched upon at the moment. We talked a lot about life sciences. These days, another buzzword comes in more and more is called health tech, which means that there is maybe more and more technology and engineering coming into the life sciences field. And I think you both have activities in that. This is going to be the century of what you could call nanobiotechnology, of the combination of those. Is it the 21st century is going to be mainly marked not just by biopharma or not just by medtech, but maybe this convergence of these technologies, and those are going to be the winners for future industries and stuff like that?
Well, I think one of my projects, and it's not my area of expertise, but where I believe is the future is within pharma, is immunotherapies. And everything will be done so personalized. Beforehand, we had one fits all. Now we realize that there is no such thing as one fits all. And now we're taking actually personalization to the next level, whereby we're actually going to isolate T cells, immune cells from an individual, re-engineer them, re-inject them to basically fight disease. The so-called CAR-T treatments or the off-the-shelf CAR-T or whatever. But then I think for the first time, pharma is faced with a challenge that they haven't faced before. Beforehand, you just, you make small molecules, or you extract something, or you create something, you put it in a formula, you inject it, or you take it, or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, we need engineering tools and high-end engineering tools, because for these treatments, you're looking at 3 weeks, you're looking at, $500,000 for one treatment, and one treatment might not be sufficient. So you've created something that is economically not viable, also not scalable. Decentralization is very important. Nevertheless, technologies that work well in hands of certain people and not necessarily other people. So we need much more innovation, much more automation. We need to compress these timelines from 3 weeks to less than 1 week. We need to make it, instead of $500,000 US, $50 US, 50,000, sorry. You don't do that anymore with, you know, the outdated kind of procedures that we have. So I think lots of innovation will come into play here. So I think this will definitely craft and shape the future, I believe. Yeah. And I think maybe because if this is a closing kind of question, what I wanted to stress as well, and certainly what Canada is concerned, every country needs to look a little bit at what you're good at. For instance, we see that we get a lot of demand from Singapore and Dubai, from the Emirates, and currently sitting in the Emirates. So the question is, they're not innovators. Nevertheless, they're very early adopters. If they see something interesting and that's very innovative, they're one of the first ones to actually pick it up, test it, try it out, and so forth. So you need to know what you're good at. And maybe a silly thing to mention, but when we were talking with our Canadian partner about, you know, our production, and then also the question in our first year of launch, we're going to go to 3 million test cards. And then we said, okay, if the demand would be as such, we can easily get to assemblies of 50 million. But then, of course, production needs to follow. And it might seem silly, but it isn't. Canada has space. They can really expand. They said, look around. We have acres and acres of land. If we needed an additional production site and so forth, we can build it. We have space. Our assembly line is actually happening in the UK. It's a company, space is simply not there. If we want to scale, we can no longer do it there. It seems silly, but sometimes you have to look at what are the strengths of a certain country. Are you innovators? Do you have production capacity? Do you have actually space for production capacity? What is it? How do you want to differentiate you from, you know, maybe other countries? And I think the same for Flanders. Do we want to compete with the US? We're good in certain things, we're less good in other things. Let's see where we can differentiate us from one another. I think that's going to be important.
Innovation, Katleen, is where we can compete. Of course, you know, commercialization is where we cannot compete.
No.
But innovation, we can absolutely compete. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. No, that actually combines very well the two sides of the ocean. I would say that we can make a difference. I think in view of the time, we will have to see going to the end of this and see if there's any questions. Yves, I'm going to give the word back to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Katleen Verleysen, Lode Debrabandere, and Jan Wauters for this really insightful and very interesting exchange of ideas. I think we can give you a virtual round of applause. We can start the questions and answers. They're not yet in the chat, so we'll also unmute the microphones. So if you want, you can just raise your hand and jump in to ask your question. Maybe I have a first one for Katleen and Lode. If you look at both sides of the ocean, you already mentioned a little bit, you have a lot of young people graduating at universities. And in the past, I think they tend more to start in the big companies, so where they will do one specific task. Now, do you see that you're more eager to go to startups, scale-ups, or is there still a tendency that they would like to start their career at the big pharma companies or the big life science companies? There is an evolution at both sides of the ocean. So how do you see that?
You know, I can quickly give you an example. You know, any example is also an N of one, so that's not a kind of, you know, strategy here. But when I started the company in Belgium, you know, the first hire we had is a PhD out of University of Antwerp, a microbiologist. She had an opportunity to start right away at Pfizer. Pfizer just liked her thesis, liked her work. They could right away start there, and was hiring her. And then, you know, I spoke to her, and you know, we offered basically something that, you know, a big pharma cannot offer. You know, we don't pigeonhole people. You know, as a startup, you have a lot of incentives which are not monetary per se, but they are, you know, career building. And so you can really, you know, to be honest with you, I somewhat regret I started where I started, because I could have become, you know, earlier an entrepreneur than I came an entrepreneur now. You know, but so it's startups do have the ability to provide incentives that big pharma cannot. Younger people, and that's part of the DNA and the culture more and more of Flanders, are really looking up at entrepreneurs, and they like entrepreneurship. And you know, the second one we hired was a veterinarian doctor with also on top of that a PhD, that, you know, wanted to come to us because, you know, we offer different things than big pharma does. You know, it's not, one is not better than the other per se. You know, big pharma is good to get some exposure, some experience. You know, you just get sophistication in your career built in. But if you know, want to really, you know, leverage your entrepreneurial skills, startups are good. And I think people are absolutely eager to start in startups. And that's the same, you know, in, I would say, in like areas like, you know, Montreal, Toronto, Boston, San Diego, San Francisco. You know, it's a bit regional. There's a culture there. And I think in that perspective, I see that happening a little bit in Flanders, probably at a lower level, but still at an interesting. I was kind of surprised that we had no problem to beat Pfizer, to hire quality and talent. It was nice.
Yeah, I think I believe it all depends on the mindset. You have people that are born to be in large, comfortable companies for longer careers, and you have basically people that love the dynamic kind of, you know, entering into a race, because in a startup you are in a very competitive environment always, otherwise you're working on the wrong product. And it's a race, and everything should have been done yesterday, and the pressure is enormous to reach milestones and so forth. It's a little bit a different mindset that you need. And I think after doing it for so many times, if we recruit people, we can immediately say this is startup material and this is not startup material. You pick it up right away. And certain people are made for it, are born to do that, and other people simply are not at all having that mindset. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. There's also an interesting question about Africa in the chat from Martin. So Martin, maybe if you can unmute your mic, you can jump in and maybe you can introduce yourself and just rephrase the question. So
I'm Martin Ogang,
yeah.
Originally from Uganda, but based in Toronto at the moment. I'm just interested in what is being done on the continent, and I've listened right through the beginning up to the end. I didn't hear any mention about Africa. So what role can Africa play, and how can Africa benefit from, you know, what is going on at the moment? How would you direct Africa to reposition its activities in order to be able to basically link up with the rest of the world in moving forward?
Yeah,
Yes.
Martin, it's not an easy question, that, to be quite honest. And it's unfortunate, but it's still the case, is that money rules the world, in a sense. And I part of my PhD, I've spent that doing that in South Africa. So I lived in Stellenbosch. I was at Stellenbosch University for quite some time during my PhD. And it was just about the time that Nelson Mandela from ANC became in power. And then all of a sudden there was an upheaval in South Africa saying, okay, this is great. Now South Africa as a starting point, because it's, let's say, almost the most European kind of culturally country. Now things are going to change for the better. We had Warner Lambert there, and we thought, okay, this is now going to go. And then we saw, because of very different and difficult government related issues, that business, instead of picking up, initially it did pick up, but then it went down again. I think what can Africa do? I think for me, it already starts, with the complications of governments in general. It needs to be supported in a sense. Other than that, I have zero experience doing business in Africa, unfortunately. Yeah.
Same
So
here.
I don't know, Lode, what's your vision?
No, I don't have experience. I think, I would probably go back to your statements, Katleen, about, you got to know what you're good at. And, that I would say there might be spots in Africa where, there is talent and education and expertise available around certain aspects of healthcare that are probably more relevant for the African continent. And I would say focus on that as your starting point. Don't try to copy things or anything like that. I said just build from your own strength. And there must be areas that are quite unique to Africa that can probably be best addressed by people locally in certain hotspots of technology and healthcare. And there might be, again, I would say like Flanders started with a focus on innovation. I think there are some good universities in Africa, and I would say that's where you probably want to start and get some success stories out, which then allows you to market those success stories and grow from there. And I think that's basically how Flanders started as well. So that would be my recommendation. Start with that.
Can I add a follow-up question there? I'm basically coming from a background of financial services, and actually I'm looking at projects across a number of African countries. And one of the areas we are focusing on, as the group has mentioned, is of course healthcare, because Africa should not really be traveling all over the world looking for quality healthcare. How can this group work on a project that is focused on developing a sort of a university-led situation where you have the diagnostics, you have the laboratories, you have the innovation being done on the African continent? I'm actually thinking about Uganda. That's where I'm coming from. So how can this group work with Makerere University, which has actually an impeccable medical school, to help that medical school move forward in terms of innovation, training, and sharing of experience?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I can give an example, and that's coming out of Flanders as well. We have the Presence Foundation, and we actually do have, if we're thinking of Paul Stoffels, a very known Flemish person, chairman of J&J for many years, as well as Rudy Pauwels, for instance. They're also at the forefront of Ebola. And many other things. So the Presence Foundation, started up by Rudy Pauwels, is actually focusing on mobile labs in Africa. And it makes us rethink diagnostics altogether. We know that people cannot always travel to hospitals or get the best healthcare they should get, or the right diagnosis. So we should bring healthcare to them. And if you want to make things mobile, you need to miniaturize, because you can, of course, not put big containers on rails and so forth. So we're working on indeed mobile labs that are catering and that are BSL, so biolab safety level 4, to be able to deal with Ebola as well. Really making them mobile, air conditioned, with the right wiring, with the right reception and internet connection and everything you can think of, fully equipped with the highest end technologies you can imagine. So I think that's where we can learn from Africa, because you make the questions extremely difficult for us. Because yes, with us in Europe and US, Canada, healthcare systems are fine. You have top-notch hospitals you can go to, which is not the case in Africa. But there are people working on solutions there, and you put the bar extremely high. Just appetite from working together, trying things out, letting us know what will work, what will not work for your country is of tremendous value. We always say, don't put a product in the market in isolation of your end user. and really defining the end user specifications, the requirements, understanding your countries, I think that's where you can really put a contribution. We do not understand your continent or your countries, and only if we talk and have many conversations and actually put people willing to really kind of say, what is now the highest need? What do we require? Then we can come up with answers that you again can then try out and help us fine tune. That's very important as well. So, but definitely Flanders is playing a role there with our mobile units, bringing the highest top-notch diagnostics tools to the most remote areas in Africa.
The good thing, of course, is that we have in North America as well as in Europe a lot of sons and daughters from Africa who are in your field, and actually they should be reached out to help that understanding that you're talking about, because they know the continent.
Yes, absolutely, and I think you need to do a little bit what the Chinese did. They put their people in all top-notch universities in Europe and in the States, and then culturally they're so driven to take care of their parents, and if the parents could not migrate to the US, they would go back to their country. They took all that knowledge to their country, and if you look where they are today, you can only say this was a big success. So I would say let's also work, get people educated as much as they can, and don't do it in isolation. Don't do it on your continent. The same way I left Flanders just to have an open mind. I studied in South Africa. I studied in the US, just to have a broader view on what's happening in the world. And I could only say, go out, get people trained at foreign universities, take that knowledge back home and do something productive with it.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we go to the last question. There was also a question about talent, which is of course one of the main issues in the chat, from Ravi Nayak. Maybe Ravi, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question about talent with some experience.
Thanks. Hi, guys. First of all, excellent presentation. Just a shout out to Dirk, who invited us to participate at this event. As a background, I'm the president of Capstone Networks. We are a management consulting firm based out of Toronto, helping international companies expand into Canada, and Canadian companies taking medium-sized companies internationally, Europe and Asia. So my question traditionally, the experience has been that, areas, even Toronto boasts about an amazing ecosystem when it comes to clinical trials, biotech. But the availability of talent is always an issue. Everybody talks about talent, yes. But, traditionally when we take companies wherever, they are not looking for fresh graduates. They're looking for at least, people 5, 10, about 15 years of experience in R&D. And that's when, we find issues in mobilizing talent. What's been your experience? And my question is to all of you guys.
Yeah, I think with money comes talent. It's unfortunate to say, but if there's lots of money around, you will always have lots of talent around as well. And I think it's about, and I think that is maybe a little bit the difficulty of Canada as well, because you have the proximity of the US and of course the means that are available there, that you indeed have quite a lot of your citizens actually crossing the border and working in the US and close to home, and not making the reverse kind of thing what I've done. Lode has stayed in the US as well. I've returned back home, but it's yeah. So I don't know, Lode.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point. I mean it's just, yes, it might be a challenge. On the other hand, I believe that startups and innovation, it requires a different mindset of the people. And if you can offer and be a little bit more like US-like in your ability to offer some ownership and equity to these young people, it goes a long way. Even if it's 0.25%, offering some equity early on might really just, find you the best people and then, keep that talent for a long period of time. So you got to find what really sticks. And yes, money is important, but I would say ownership is important as well. And then, it's all about the leadership, in my opinion, as well, that provides that kind of environment where younger people can thrive and get some ownership.
Yeah, and particularly for the Flanders region, we are fortunate, as I also said in the beginning, we have probably the biggest concentration of pharma and biopharma in the whole of Europe. So the talent is there, that tends to move, but also we should not forget that Belgium is a very high, dense, concentrated population. One of the, I think the most dense one, or almost the most dense one in Europe. And if you drive or you travel or you fly 1 hour, you are in other hotspots in Europe. So I mean, the mobility there is easy. So the talent is really moving around in the area. So
yeah. And also, Jan, what we may not forget, which is quite unique, is that Belgium also created a system. If we're talking about ownership, of course, startups, you will work with stock option packages and ESOP plans for retainment of people. Belgium actually created a system that once they're offered, that you can actually pay your taxes at of course, at that point in time, very, very low value. And by the time you actually execute upon them and sell your options, you don't pay any taxes anymore. So this is an extremely elegant system. There are ways of looking at that's the same thing. There are tax benefits as well for companies that want to put themselves in Flanders as well. So I think you need to be very creative there as well and make it very intriguing and worthwhile coming over. Having said that, because we have talked a lot about money and the importance of it, I must say that the vast majority of the people I have in my company are not in the company because of money. And they're doing it for completely different reasons. It's more about, wanting to make an impact. And that's different than actually what comes on your bank account at the end of every single month. So just to put it in the right perspective as well, it's not all of a sudden that you're going to create systems and say, okay, now you have whopping salaries and beneficial tax schemes on stock option plans and so forth, that all of a sudden everybody's going to cross the border. I think it's more about, certainly if you're in management and you're responsible for the success of a company, you want to make sure that you have all the ammunition and means and tools to become successful. And it's more about, making sure that the money is not drying out financially. For me, that's more important than my own remuneration, I must honestly say. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I think we can wrap up here. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your participation. Also, Katleen, Lode, and Jan, thanks for all your input, your very excellent insights. You will receive today the PowerPoint presentation. So, and then of course, please reach out to us if you have any questions linked to Flanders or looking for connections. Stay safe and hopefully we meet soon personally in future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.